Welcome to the Reconcilence Review Show. We've reached the end of Halloween month, and thus the end of Poltergeist month. In the last 3 weeks, we've covered the 2015 remake, the 1982 original, the sequel, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side from 1986, and we've now reached the third installment in the trilogy and the final entry in the franchise, 1988's Poltergeist 3. There are a few things I'd like to address before we begin the actual review. The first and most obvious is this film's overall quality. There's no way to really sugarcoat it. This isn't exactly the strongest film in the franchise. Don't get me wrong, this is much better than that shitty remake from 2015 by leaps and bounds. But compared to the original 2 films that this one spawned from, it doesn't really hold a candle to those in any way, shape, or form. One big factor in the deterioration in quality is the change in cast and crew. Director Brian Gibson from the previous film has been replaced by Gary Sherman, who both directed and wrote this film. Young actor Oliver Robbins had retired from acting at this point, and Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams had been very adamant about not returning for another sequel, as they felt the original story had reached its natural conclusion and didn't see how they could take that particular narrative any further. But despite the story reaching a satisfying ending with Part 2, and the fact that audiences and critics were never too keen on that sequel to begin with, it apparently made enough money at the box office that MGM was eager to milk the franchise for all it was worth with another sequel that no one asked for. Thus, the only returning cast members we have are Heather O'Rourke, mostly, and Zelda Rubinstein, who had a clause for multiple sequels in her original contract from the first film. The rest of the family is now replaced by Tom Skerritt, Nancy Allen, and Lara Flynn Boyle as Bruce and Patricia Gardner and their daughter, Donna, who are apparently Carol Ann's uncle, aunt, and cousin, being Diane Freeling's sister's family, even though we've had no mention of these people in either of the first 2 films, especially the second one where their existence, at least Patricia's, theoretically should have been central to the plot given the whole maternal clairvoyant bloodline thing. But I digress. Additional supporting cast include Richard Fire as Dr. Seaton, Kipley Wentz as Scott, and Nathan Davis as Reverend Henry Kane, aka The Beast, replacing Julian Beck from the second film. However, Beck is still credited here, as is voice actor Corey Burton, who was brought in to do ADR work mimicking Beck's voice for both this and the prior film. The next thing I'd like to address is the lore behind what's known as the Poltergeist curse. Over the years, a number of documented occurrences that befell the cast and crew of these 3 films would come to light and be collectively referred to as the Poltergeist curse. To start off, Oliver Robbins, who plays the character of Robbie Freeling, has that infamous scene from the first film where he's attacked by the clown doll in his room. Everyone remembers that scene. It's one of the standout ones in that film. What most people don't know is that the same animatronic clown contraption would get stuck around Robin's neck, almost choking him to death, until Spielberg stepped in and literally saved his life. And that's just the start of it, so bear with me, because I want to list them all because it's actually rather fascinating. Sometime after the first film's release, Richard Lawson, who portrayed parapsychologist Ryan, would have a near-death experience of his own. He was boarding a flight and was recognized by a flight attendant, and after signing an autograph for said attendant, was upgraded to a first-class seat, which turned out to save his life, as half of the passengers on the flight would tragically lose their lives when the plane got into an accident, including the poor soul who exchanged seats with Lawson. Fun fact, Lawson would once again become famous later in life for becoming Beyoncé's stepdad after marrying her mother, Tina Knowles. Next, we have one of the creepiest occurrences on this list, which is the scene towards the end of the first film where Jo Beth Williams is struggling to escape the swimming pool full of mud when she's assaulted by the skeletons of the corpses below the Freeling house. Thing is, these were not props created for the film, but instead were real-life skeletons from real-life people. God knows how any of this was allowed to happen, but a lot of crazy shit happened in the 80s, so I wouldn't put it past them, and I don't even know what else to say about it. The last part of the so-called curse that pertains to the first film is of course probably the most well-known, which is the fact that actress Dominique Dunne, who portrayed eldest daughter Dana Freeling, was tragically murdered by her ex-boyfriend 2 weeks after the first film's release. And in a perfect example of how broken our justice system has always been, he only served 3 years on a manslaughter charge for choking her to death. Despite the efforts of her father, author Dominic Dunn, who consequently became a victims' rights advocate and in turn covered the O.J. Simpson trial in its entirety, being physically present in the courtroom every day. I remember when I was younger and the Dana character was absent and not mentioned at all in the second film, I figured it was because the character was off at college. That's how I thought it was until I found out what really happened. A truly sad outcome that should have never occurred. Rest in peace, Miss Dunn. The next part of the curse pertains to occurrences relating to the second film, Poltergeist 2, and this film, Poltergeist 3, and are all cases of tragic deaths of the cast and crew in the vein of the fate that befell Dunn. Will Sampson, who portrayed Taylor the Medicine Man in Part 2, was an actual shaman in real life, and performed an exorcism on the set, attempting to purge it of any bad spirits that he believed may have been lingering there. Sampson would sadly pass away a year after the film's release due to complications with a failed heart and lung transplant. A similar fate befell actor Julian Beck, who passionately portrayed the role of Reverend Henry Kane, aka the Beast, in the second film. During filming, Beck was in the final stages of stomach cancer and would pass away just before that film's release. Tragedy struck one final time during the production of the third film. First, the garage set used in the film caught on fire when a special effects mishap with dry ice caused 3 crew members to be injured and hospitalized, and probably the most tragic of them all, franchise star and beloved child actress Heather O'Rourke unfortunately passed away at age 12 shortly before the third film's release due to a bowel obstruction that had been grossly misdiagnosed by physicians some months earlier. They actually had to use a stunt double for the last few minutes of this film, hence why we never see Carol Ann's face during the last few scenes following the final confrontation with Kane. Of course, we're all aware that no such poltergeist curse exists, and these were merely a series of unfortunate events that tragically occurred in a coincidental time frame to the production of these 3 films. Now, with that said, let's get started on our review of Poltergeist 3. Sometime after the events of the second film, the Freelings have sent their daughter Carol Ann to temporarily live with her Aunt Patricia and Uncle Bruce and their daughter Donna in a high-rise apartment in Chicago's John Hancock Center, in order to distance her from the trauma of what happened in the previous films with Kane and the Poltergeist. So we're 20 minutes into this damn film, and almost nothing of significance has occurred yet. We hear Kane's voice once or twice trying to reach out to Carol Ann, but that's about it. Speaking of Carol Ann, her name is said so many times in this film that if you were to turn it into a drinking game, you'd succumb to alcohol poisoning by the end of the film's runtime. After nothing but a bunch of talking for roughly 25 minutes or so, Tangina appears out of the blue in a random scene where she's apparently telepathically alerted that Kane is pursuing Carol Ann once again, as she rushes to find her. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Dr. Seaton, the poorest excuse of a psychiatrist ever portrayed on screen, as this moron truly believes that Carol Ann possesses some heightened ability to induce mass hysteria in those around her through the power of suggestion. This character is so badly written that you just want to see him die a horrible death. He's supposed to be helping Carol Ann work through the trauma she endured in the first 2 films, but the irony is that by forcing her to relive these events in these so-called therapy sessions is what apparently brings Kane's spirit back as she begins to vividly remember everything that previously happened, strengthening his ability to return or some shit. I don't know. I guess that enchanted Native American spirit that Craig T. Nelson impaled him with in the climax of the previous film wasn't enough to kill him after all. I'm starting to think that Tangina and Taylor didn't do as much to help the Freelings as they initially believed. One of the cool things that I did like is Kane's newfound ability to transport himself through any mirror or glass, playing mind games with the family for the first 30 minutes of the film. This is an example of a practical effect done marvelously. Now, how he got this ability after being defeated twice by parapsychologists, a medicine man, and an irate father is beyond me. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I suppose. What was the purpose of Tangina and Taylor again? So at the 35-minute point, with Carol Ann left alone at home, Kane makes his presence known, And another moment that I thought was pretty cool here is we get to see O'Rourke display a bit more of her acting skills, even if ever so briefly, when Kane imitates and takes her form to antagonize her. Honestly, in my opinion, the scariest thing in this film is the fact that the family lives in a fucking high-rise apartment with such a large open window. I keep worrying more that Carol Ann is going to accidentally fall through that damn thing to her death than I am of Kane terrorizing her. Up to this point, camera tricks through the mirror transporting ability have done a good job of showing Kane without really giving us a good look at his face. But once they do, good God, will you wish they hadn't. Like I said previously, actor Julian Beck, who portrayed the role of Reverend Henry Kane, aka the Beast in the previous film, had passed away before production began on Part 3. So actor Nathan Davis, who doesn't resemble Beck in the slightest, either physically or verbally, was layered in makeup and prosthetics in a failed attempt to make him resemble Beck physically. And verbally, he had his lines replaced by voice actor Corey Burton, who does a damn good job of imitating Beck's voice, along with some of Beck's actual looped audio from the previous film. At this point, things begin to move a bit faster as Donna and her boyfriend Scott arrive to find Carol Ann being pulled through a portal in a pool of water on the ground in the garage complex by Kane. While attempting to save her, both Donna and Scott are pulled into the portal to the other side by Kane as well. A few moments later, Bruce, who had been attending a business function in the building with his wife, wanders into the space occupied by the public pool, which he notices completely frozen, until Scott comes shooting through the ice mere moments later. He tries to explain to Bruce what happened, only for Trish to arrive with the idiot doctor in tow, who still believes that all of this is nothing more than mind games Carol Ann is playing on everyone. Seriously, how the fuck this guy earned a doctorate in anything other than being a complete moron is beyond me. Bruce and Trish head to their apartment and hear Carol Ann pleading for help as the portal opens within the doorframe of her room, her hand attempting to reach out while Kane maintains a firm grip on her. But just then, Tangina arrives and reveals that Carol Ann pleading for help is actually Kane in disguise, attempting to pull them through the portal to the other side as well. After introducing herself, she explains that Kane needs to fully eliminate anyone in the world of the living who cares for Carol Ann, or else he won't be able to keep her trapped on the other side. She inquires about the whereabouts of Dr. Seaton, whom they locate and bring with them to the garage area. I love how she hasn't even met this asshole yet, and she still has no reservations of displaying her disdain for that rat bastard by referring to him as Dr. Rasputin. According to Tangina, Kane must complete his objective this time, or else Carol Ann would serve no purpose to him, because as she ages and her innocence dissolves, he wouldn't be able to use her to manipulate and trap the spirits passing through the other side. And having failed twice in the last 6 years, it was now or never for the entity known as the Beast to achieve his goal. Tangina attempts to guide Carol Ann, whom she could see on the other side of the mirror, back to our side in the world of the living. But when she finally gets close enough, it's revealed to once again be Kane in disguise, who kills her instantly, and we see her corpse literally rot and drop to the ground as the maggots dissolve her body quicker than a tub of acid. We see a hand emerge from where her face once was, and the body of Donna erupting from Tangina's torso like some twisted version of a butterfly emerging from the cocoon of death. At this point, Trish shows her true colors as she actually suggests to Bruce that they abandon Carol Ann and leave with Donna immediately. I mean, she just makes a complete 180 here, and it's just not what you would expect. It's so out of nowhere. But she turns out to not only be an uncaring bitch to her niece, but also just as much of an imbecile as Dr. Seaton, suggesting that everything he said was correct. While Bruce obviously is more inclined to believe Tangina's account of events, given what they had just experienced firsthand. What kind of fucking shit is this where the uncle by marriage, with literally no blood relation to the main character, is the one who cares more about her well-being than her own blood relatives? Literally, Tom Skerritt is the only likable actor/character in this whole film other than O'Rourke. Which is odd, because when the film first starts, you automatically think that this guy is going to be the one to cause all the problems as far as not giving a shit about anything and not wanting to deal with the baggage that comes with taking care of his wife's niece. But no. Instead, he's the only one you're rooting for in this whole damn thing other than Carol Ann. Seriously, the Trish character became so unlikable so quickly that it's unbelievable to wrap your head around it. But props for the effective bait and switch with the roles here. So Kane traps them in the elevator, and once they escape, Bruce is nowhere to be found. Kane then appears to Trish once again disguised as Carol Ann, attempting to coerce her into handing over Tangina's necklace, lamenting that she will sacrifice herself and go with Kane, and Donna and Scott would be returned. And it's this that prompts Trish to realize that she truly does love Carol Ann, and that she'll do anything to get her back so they can be a family again. Yeah, right. Supposedly, or so she says. I wouldn't trust this two-faced bitch if my whole life depended on it. If she said it was sunny outside, I'd grab a fucking umbrella because it's more than likely raining out there. By the way, the doctor finally gets his comeuppance when he meets his end at the bottom of the elevator shaft when pushed by Kane disguised as Donna. So we've reached the climax, and this is where this already lackluster film completely falls apart at the seams. Kane continues to terrorize Trish into handing over Tangina's necklace when her spirit suddenly appears and tells Kane that he doesn't need Carol Ann because she herself is now able to lead him into the light. So if you've seen the first two films, you realize how big of a fuck-up this is in the narrative continuity of this trilogy. Kane's entire motive completely shifts here from him not wanting to go into the light in the previous two films to him now wanting to cross the threshold to be purified? What the fucking hell? It's literally stated in both fucking films before this that the spirits of Kane's followers who he trapped were the ones who wanted Carol Ann to help them cross over into the light, and that Kane was the one who was resisting wanting to use Carol Ann's innocence to manipulate and trap souls for him to eternally torment as they pass through the other side. How do you drop the ball this fucking hard? Director Gary Sherman obviously had not seen the first two films and had no prior knowledge to the narrative groundwork already in place. You'd think the one thing would be dead sure of when writing the film's script is your main villain's motivation, but when you can't even execute that correctly, how the hell is anything else you expose us to supposed to come off as comprehensible? So out of nowhere, Kane is just like, alright, fuck it, and he just goes into the light with Tangina, and Carol Ann returns. As I stated earlier on, Heather O'Rourke unfortunately passed away just 2 months before this film's release, so major reshoots were needed to alter the original ending. Thus why when Carol Ann returns, we never see her face in order to hide the fact that it's a different actress as the film just abruptly ends. But not before oddly implying that Kane is possibly not gone and could possibly return again at some point by showing lightning strike in the sky above the building while we hear his evil laugh lead into the credits. Why this was done is beyond anyone's comprehension, but that's how this film, and thankfully, this original iteration of the franchise, comes to an end. The studio said they were trying not to exploit O'Rourke's death, but this last-minute addition to the reshoots obviously speaks to the contrary. The sudden death of O'Rourke threw the cast and crew for such a loop that the narrative forgets to explain the fate of Scott's character, who hasn't been seen since he was pulled over and trapped on the other side earlier on in the film, as someone at the studio forgot to call Kipley Wentz to come back for the reshoots. Overall, yeah, this film is a giant fucking mess. This is a perfect example of a studio milking a franchise far beyond its intended scope, and with all of the grim and unfortunate events surrounding the Poltergeist films as a whole, I guess this was the only way it possibly could have ended. The turnover of the cast and creatives by the time of this film's production sorely shows through its half-assed efforts at delivering a substantial sequel. Especially the god-awful and rushed ending that had no semblance of coherence at all for either this film or the two that preceded it. If you haven't seen it and were wondering if you should, I say you could probably spend an hour and a half doing something more productive, like actually watching a good fucking movie. However, if you're a completionist and you just want to finish it for the sake of that, then I say give it a shot. Even if it's not the greatest of the trilogies, it's not the worst thing, it's not unwatchable, it's just poorly done. And of course, should you find yourself with a gun to your head being forced to choose between this film and the shitty 2015 remake of the original, well, I don't think I need to say any more, do I? Thank you all for joining me for Poltergeist Month. This is my first set of Halloween reviews, and I look forward to continuing on with these every year going forward. Next year I will be covering the entire series of the Channel Zero series, which consists of 4 seasons, so that should cover all of next October. I'd like to take the time to thank my editor. Thank you for always doing a great job putting these visuals together. Couldn't do this without you. And thank you as well to all of you for tuning in and giving me a few minutes of your time each week during these retrospectives. It means more to me than you could ever know, and I sincerely appreciate it. And I hope you'll stick with me for the long run. Everyone, have a safe and enjoyable Halloween. Remember, take care of yourselves and each other, and until next time, take care, everyone.